occurring to me that I haven't actually asked anybody to do readings, so I would appreciate 2 volunteers. Francis, thank you. Anybody else? Sam, thank you. Sam? Yeah. I think my eyesight's good enough for that, just about. Oh, thank you. Got it. Okay. So, reading from Genesis 32, Jacob wrestles with God. That night Jacob got up and took his 2 wives, his 2 female servants, and his 11 sons, and crossed the ford of the Jabbok. After he'd sent them across the stream, he sent over all his possessions. So Jacob was left alone, and a man wrestled with him till daybreak. When the man saw that he could not overpower him, he touched the socket of Jacob's hip, so that his hip was wrenched as he wrestled with the man. Then the man said, "Let me go, for it's daybreak." But Jacob replied, "I will not let you go unless you bless me." The man asked him, "What is your name?" "Jacob," he answered. Then the man said, "Your name will no longer be Jacob, but Israel, because you have struggled with God and with humans and have overcome." Jacob said, "Please tell me your name." But he replied, "Why do you ask my name?" Then he blessed him there. So Jacob called the place Peniel, saying, "It is because I saw God face to face, and yet my life was spared." The sun rose above him as he passed Peniel, and he was limping because of his hip. Therefore, to this day, the Israelites do not eat the tendon attached to the socket of the hip, because the socket of Jacob's hip was touched near the tendon.
John 20, 24 to 31. Now Thomas, also known as Didymus, one of the 12, was not with the disciples when Jesus came. So the other disciples told him, "We have seen the Lord." But he said to them, "Unless I see the nail marks in his hands, and put my fingers where the nails were, and put my hand into his side, I will not believe." A week later, his disciples were in the house again, and Thomas was with them. Though the doors were locked, Jesus came and stood among them and said, "Peace be with you." Then he said to Thomas, "Put your fingers here. See my hands. Reach out your hand and put it into my side. Stop doubting and believe." Thomas said to him, "My Lord and my God." Then Jesus told him, "Because you have seen me, you have believed. Blessed are those who have not seen and yet have believed."
Today we are sitting between the very depressing US presidential election outcome and Trans Day of Remembrance. The genocide in Gaza and Lebanon and the attacks on Ukraine continue, as last week we marked Remembrance Day. And we count the innumerable lives senselessly lost to war. We're also fast approaching winter as each day continues to get darker and the moments of daylight are shorter and shorter with every passing day. It's understandably a time where it's difficult to feel hopeful or joyful. And I know I'm not alone in finding winters hard. But I read a really lovely article in the New York Times in the winter of 2020. And it reminded me that for centuries, human lives were counted in how many winters you survived. Winter was when you hunkered around a warm fire with your community and you sang songs to stave off the darkness and you prayed that your supplies would last you through the cold months. I think it feels for many of us now with everything going on in the world, as though we're in the middle of a very dark and lonely winter. A dark night of the soul, if you will. I spent most of my Christian life as a child and a young person being told that it's okay to doubt and it's okay to ask questions, but in practice, whenever I did, I was presented with a nice, neat answer and pressured to accept it. The message was pretty clear. It's okay to question, but only if you come to the right conclusion, and it's better to just believe. Despair, anger, hopelessness, and the dark night of the soul were not met with compassion, but with scorn and shame. But all of us wrestle with doubt and despair, and I think sometimes it can be particularly scary because it not only represents a loss of faith for many of us, but also potentially a loss of identity and a loss of community. Now, we're very blessed here at the gathering to be free to doubt, to embrace uncertainty, to share. We're encouraged to share our questions. And I think it would serve us well if we continue to be completely honest and open about wrestling with God and with our faith. Jacob wrestled with God. He refused to let go until he was blessed. But he was also fundamentally changed by the experience. He was wounded, even. To doubt, to wrestle with God, is uncomfortable, even painful, and it can leave us scarred. But it is sacred. And there's blessing in the pain. In the famous passage of Doubting Thomas as well, we see another person wrestling with God, even outright refusing to accept the gospel that Jesus is risen. You'd think that the disciples might be inclined to cling to whatever sign of hope there was, because their Lord had just been executed, and all of their hopes for the future, the overthrowing of Rome, freedom for their people, ushering in the kingdom of God, was all gone. But Thomas is a realist, and he knows a hopeless cause when he sees one. I used to think that Thomas demanding to touch Jesus was like us demanding proof that God is real, and it's more holy to just believe like the other disciples. There's another aspect of this story that I think we overlook. In all of our focus on Thomas, we can gloss over the scandalous reality that Jesus, God, was scarred by his interaction with the world. And somehow, despite spending my entire life in church, attending services and hearing the resurrection story and reading this passage, that's something I never fully realised until I was an adult, that Jesus' risen, healed body carried scars. Just as Jacob was wounded by wrestling with God, so it goes with the divine. God, in the physical incarnation of Jesus, was permanently wounded by taking on human form and submitting to the violence that we inflicted on him. We're not alone in this dark night. Our God knows what it's like to walk through this broken, messy world. He is permanently scarred by the endeavour. Yet he still believed it was worth doing. And I think Thomas gets a bad rep, honestly. What if we look at this story differently? Wanting to touch God, I think, is a highly relatable experience. Maybe wanting to touch Jesus' body is more like liturgy and sacraments, and fleshed practices that we can touch, and hear, and smell, and eat. These practices keep us grounded to God, to our faith, and to each other. The New York Times article that I mentioned earlier spoke about all the kind of different festivals and celebrations and rituals that humans, particularly in the Northern Hemisphere, have practiced for millennia to get through the winter. All around the world, across history, winter is marked with festivals of light, and with lighting of candles, with feasts, practices that inspire hope and community in times of scarcity and darkness. In our own tradition, Adventist fast approaching, a season of waiting and searching for hope in the darkness. I particularly enjoy reading about the Iranian tradition of Yalda, which has been practiced for 2,500 years and is rooted in Zoroastrian practices of ancient Persia. On the winter solstice, families gather for a feast. They share food, they surround themselves with candles, and they eat, and they recite poetry. And a professor of Iranian studies, Omid Safi, said, "It's a beautiful way of assuring you that you have lived through the long nights before. It is precisely at the point that the night is longest and darkest that you have actually turned a corner. And if you can't afford a feast, it's enough just to bring a flower. Look for the smallest bit of beauty around you. At a time when it seems like the mega systems are all broken and falling apart, return your gaze to the small." Sometimes I'm not sure what I believe about God. I'll be honest, sometimes I'm not even sure if I believe in God. I often feel really hopeless at the state of the world, and I despair at the darkness, both literal and metaphorical, that's closing in around us. I wonder, can God really be here with us? But what I've learned over the past few years is that it really is okay not to know. Faith for me is the practice of putting one foot in front of the other, regardless of what I think or how I feel. We do justice, love mercy, and walk humbly now. So I light my candles, I sing my songs, I say the prayers, I eat the bread and I drink the wine. I find flowers. And in the doing, I'm often surprised by an encounter with God, showing up in simple things like bread and wine, community and questions and candles and liturgy. One of my favourite authors, Barbara Brown Taylor, says, "I have spent some long, scary nights waiting for the sun to come up. There have also been some long, barren seasons when I feared that the sap would never rise again. The hardest thing is to keep trusting the cycle, to keep trusting that the balance will shift again even when I can't imagine how. So far, it always has." So if we could move on to the next slide, we are going to discuss some questions about doubt and darkness. Are we 3 groups again, do you think? Yeah, cool. So we'll have one group out in the foyer, one at the back and one in the front here. Please consider these questions to be a guide. If you don't talk about those and talk about something else, that's absolutely fine. But yeah, we'll be looking at what are the things that make you doubt and struggle and wrestle with God or your faith or the church. What practices do you find helpful when you're doubting, despairing, or in the darkness? And do you feel that the pain and the wounds of wrestling with God are worth the blessing? So this is where we are unfortunately going to say goodbye to those who are online. It's been lovely to have you with us. But as we break into groups and discuss,